Chapters 88 through 91 of Human Bondage. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Tom Weiss. Of Human Bondage by W. Somerset Maugham. Chapter 88. There was a knock at the door, and a troop of children came in. They were clean and tidy now. Their faces shone with soap, and their hair was plastered down. They were going to Sunday school under Sally's charge. Athelny joked with them in his dramatic, exuberant fashion, and you could see that he was devoted to them all. His pride in their good health and their good looks was touching. Philip felt that they were a little shy in his presence, and when their father sent them off, they fled from the room in evident relief. In a few minutes Mrs. Athelny appeared. She had taken her hair out of the curling pins, and now wore an elaborate fringe. She had on a plain black dress, a hat with cheap flowers, and was forcing her hands, red and coarse from much work, into black kid gloves. "I'm going to church, Athelny," she said. "There's nothing you'll be wanting, is there?" "Only your prayers, my Betty." "They won't do you much good. You're too far gone for that," she smiled. Then, turning to Philip, she drawled, "I can't get him to go to church. He's no better than an atheist." "Doesn't she look like Rubens' second wife?" cried Athelny. "Wouldn't she look splendid in a 17th century costume? That's the sort of wife to marry, my boy. Look at her." "I believe you talked the hind leg off a donkey, Athelny," she answered calmly. She succeeded in buttoning her gloves, but before she went she turned to Philip with a kindly, slightly embarrassed smile. "You'll stay to tea, won't you? Athelny likes someone to talk to, and it's not often he gets anybody who's clever enough." "Of course he'll stay to tea," said Athelny. Then, when his wife had gone, "I make a point of the children going to Sunday school, and I like Betty to go to church. I think women ought to be religious. I don't believe myself, but I like women and children to." Philip, straight-laced in matters of truth, was a little shocked by this airy attitude. "But how can you look on while your children are being taught things which you don't think are true?" "If they're beautiful, I don't much mind if they're not true. It's asking a great deal that things should appeal to your reason as well as to your sense of the aesthetic. I wanted Betty to become a Roman Catholic. I should have liked to see her converted in a crown of paper flowers. But she's hopelessly Protestant. Besides, religion is a matter of temperament. You will believe anything if you have the religious turn of mind, and if you haven't it doesn't matter what beliefs were instilled into you, you will grow out of them. Perhaps religion is the best school of morality. It is like one of those drugs you gentlemen use in medicine which carries another in solution. It is of no efficacy in itself, but enables the other to be absorbed. You take your morality because it is combined with religion. You lose the religion and the morality stays behind. A man is more likely to be a good man if he has learned goodness through the love of God than through a perusal of Herbert Spencer." This was contrary to all Philip's ideas. He still looked upon Christianity as a degrading bondage that must be cast away at any cost. It was connected subconsciously in his mind with the dreary services in the cathedral at Tercanbury, and the long hours of boredom in the cold church at Blackstable. And the morality of which Athelny spoke was to him no more than a part of the religion which a halting intelligence preserved when it had laid aside the beliefs which alone made it reasonable. But while he was meditating a reply, Athelny, more interested in hearing himself speak than in discussion, broke into a tirade upon Roman Catholicism. For him it was an essential part of Spain, and Spain meant so much to him, because he had escaped to it from the conventionality which during his married life he had found so irksome. With large gestures, and in the emphatic tone which made what he said so striking, Athelny described to Philip the Spanish cathedrals with their vast dark spaces, the massive gold of the altar-pieces, and the sumptuous ironwork, gilt and faded, the air laden with incense, the silence. Philip almost saw the canons in their short surplices of lawn, the acolytes in red passing from the sacristy to the choir. He almost heard the monotonous chanting of vespers. The names which Athelny mentioned, Avila, Tarragona, Saragossa, Segovia, Cordova, were like trumpets in his heart. He seemed to see the great gray piles of granite set in old Spanish towns, and a landscape tawny, wild, and windswept. "I always thought I should love to go to Seville," he said casually, when Athelny, with one hand dramatically uplifted, paused for a moment. "Seville?" cried Athelny. "No, no, don't go there. Seville! It brings to mind girls dancing with castanets, singing in gardens by the Guadalquivir, bullfights, orange blossom, mantillas, mantones de Manila. It is the Spain of comic opera and Montmartre. Its facile charm can offer permanent entertainment only to an intelligence which is superficial. Théophile Gautier got out of Seville all that it has to offer. We who come after him can only repeat his sensations. He put large fat hands on the obvious, and there is nothing but the obvious there, and it is all finger-marked and frayed. Murillo is its painter." Athelny got up from his chair, walked over to the Spanish cabinet, let down the front with its great gilt hinges and gorgeous lock, and displayed a series of little drawers. He took out a bundle of photographs. "Do you know El Greco?" he asked. "Oh, I remember one of the men in Paris was awfully impressed by him." El Greco was the painter of Toledo. Betty couldn't find the photograph I wanted to show you. It's a picture that El Greco painted of the city he loved, and it's truer than any photograph. Come and sit at the table." Philip dragged his chair forward, and Athelny set the photograph before him. He looked at it curiously, for a long time, in silence. He stretched out his hand for other photographs, and Athelny passed them to him. He had never before seen the work of that enigmatic master, and at the first glance he was bothered by the arbitrary drawing. The figures were extraordinarily elongated. The heads were very small. The attitudes were extravagant. This was not realism, and yet, even in the photographs you had the impression of a troubling reality. Athelny was describing eagerly, with vivid pleasures, but Philip only heard vaguely what he said. He was puzzled. He was curiously moved. These pictures seemed to offer some meaning to him, but he did not know what the meaning was. There were portraits of men with large, melancholy eyes, which seemed to say you knew not what. There were long monks in the Franciscan habit or in the Dominican, with distraught faces, making gestures whose sense escaped you. There was an Assumption of the Virgin. There was a Crucifixion in which the painter, by some magic of feeling, had been able to suggest that the flesh of Christ's dead body was not human flesh only, but divine. And there was an Ascension in which the Saviour seemed to surge up towards the empyrean, and yet to stand upon the air as steadily as though it were solid ground. The uplifted arms of the apostles, the sweep of their draperies, their ecstatic gestures, gave an impression of exultation and of holy joy. The background of nearly all was the sky by night, the dark night of the soul, with wild clouds swept by strange winds of hell and lit luridly by an uneasy moon. "I've seen that sky in Toledo over and over again," said Athelny. "I have an idea that when first El Greco came to the city it was by such a night, and it made so vehement an impression upon him that he could never get away from it." Philip remembered how Clutton had been affected by this strange master, whose work he now saw for the first time. He thought that Clutton was the most interesting of all the people he had known in Paris. His sardonic manner, his hostile aloofness, had made it difficult to know him, but it seemed to Philip, looking back, that there had been in him a tragic force which sought vainly to express itself in painting. He was a man of unusual character, mystical after the fashion of a time that had no leaning to mysticism, who was impatient with life because he found himself unable to say the things which the obscure impulses of his heart suggested. His intellect was not fashioned to the uses of the spirit. It was not surprising that he felt a deep sympathy with the Greek who had devised a new technique to express the yearnings of his soul. Philip looked again at the series of portraits of Spanish gentlemen, with ruffles and pointed beards, their faces pale against the sober black of their clothes and the darkness of the background. El Greco was the painter of the soul, and these gentlemen, wan and wasted, not by exhaustion but by restraint, with their tortured minds, seemed to walk unaware of the beauty of the world. For their eyes look only in their hearts, and they are dazzled by the glory of the unseen. No painter has shown more piteously that the world is but a place of passage. The souls of the men he painted speak their strange longings through their eyes. Their senses are miraculously acute, not for sounds and odors and color, but for the very subtle sensations of the soul. The noble walks with the monkish heart within him, and his eyes see things which saints in their cells see too, and he is unastounded. His lips are not lips that smile. Philip, silent still, returned to the photograph of Toledo, which seemed to him the most arresting picture of them all. He could not take his eyes off it. He felt strangely that he was on the threshold of some new discovery in life. He was tremulous with a sense of adventure. He thought for an instant of the love that had consumed him. Love seemed very trivial beside the excitement which now leaped in his heart. The picture he looked at was a long one, with houses crowded upon a hill. In one corner a boy was holding a large map of the town. In another was a classical figure representing the river Tagus, and in the sky was the Virgin surrounded by angels. It was a landscape alien to all Philip's notion, for he had lived in circles that worshipped exact realism, and yet here again, strangely to himself, he felt a reality greater than any achieved by the masters in whose steps humbly he had sought to walk. He heard Athelny say that the representation was so precise that when the citizens of Toledo came to look at the picture they recognized their houses. The painter had painted exactly what he saw, but he had seen with the eyes of the spirit. There was something unearthly in that city of pale gray. It was a city of the soul seen by a wan light that was neither that of night nor day. It stood on a green hill, but of a green not of this world, and it was surrounded by massive walls and bastions to be stormed by no machines or engines of man's invention, but by prayer and fasting, by contrite sighs, and by mortifications of the flesh. It was a stronghold of God. Those gray houses were made of no stone known to masons. There was something terrifying in their aspect, and you did not know what men might live in them. You might walk through the streets and be unamazed to find them all deserted, and yet not empty. For you felt a presence invisible and yet manifest to every inner sense. It was a mystical city in which the imagination faltered like one who steps out of the light into darkness. The soul walked naked to and fro, knowing the unknowable, and conscious strangely of experience, intimate but inexpressible of the absolute. And without surprise, in that blue sky, real with a reality that not the eye but the soul confesses, with its rack of light clouds driven by strange breezes, like the cries and the sighs of lost souls, you saw the Blessed Virgin with a gown of red and a cloak of blue, surrounded by winged angels. Philip felt that the inhabitants of that city would have seen the apparition without astonishment, reverent and thankful, and have gone their ways. Athelny spoke of the mystical writers of Spain, of Teresa de Avila, San Juan de la Cruz, Fray Luis de Leon. In all of them was that passion for the unseen which Philip felt in the pictures of El Greco. They seemed to have the power to touch the incorporeal and see the invisible. They were Spaniards of their age, in whom were tremulous all the mighty exploits of a great nation. Their fancies were rich with the glories of America and the green islands of the Caribbean Sea. In their veins was the power that had come from age-long battling with the Moor. They were proud, for they were masters of the world, and they felt in themselves the wide distances, the tawny wastes, the snow-capped mountains of Castile, the sunshine and the blue sky, and the flowering plains of Andalusia. Life was passionate and manifold, and because it offered so much, they felt a restless yearning for something more. Because they were human, they were unsatisfied, and they threw this eager vitality of theirs into a vehement striving after the ineffable. Athelny was not displeased to find someone to whom he could read the translations with which for some time he had amused his leisure, and in his fine, vibrating voice he recited the Canticle of the Soul and Christ her Lover, the lovely poem which begins with the words: En una noche escura, en la noche serena of Fray Luis de Leon. He had translated them quite simply, not without skill, and he had found words which at all events suggested the rough-hewn grandeur of the original. The pictures of El Greco explained them, and they explained the pictures. Philip had cultivated a certain disdain for idealism. He had always had a passion for life, and the idealism he had come across seemed to him for the most part a cowardly shrinking from it. The idealist withdrew himself because he could not suffer the jostling of the human crowd. He had not the strength to fight, and so called the battle vulgar. He was vain, and since his fellows would not take him at his own estimate, consoled himself with despising his fellows. For Philip his type was Hayward. Fair, languid, too fat now, and rather bald, still cherishing the remains of his good looks, and still delicately proposing to do exquisite things in the uncertain future. And at the back of this were whiskey and vulgar amours of the street. It was in reaction from what Hayward represented that Philip clamoured for life as it stood. Sordidness, vice, deformity did not offend him. He declared that he wanted man in his nakedness, and he rubbed his hands when an instance came before him of meanness, cruelty, selfishness, or lust. That was the real thing. In Paris he had learned that there was neither ugliness nor beauty, but only truth. The search after beauty was sentimental. Had he not painted an advertisement of chocolat Meunier in a landscape in order to escape from the tyranny of prettiness? But here he seemed to divine something new. He had been coming to it, all hesitating, for some time, but only now was conscious of the fact. He felt himself on the brink of a discovery. He felt vaguely that here was something better than the realism which he had adored. But certainly it was not the bloodless idealism which stepped aside from life in weakness. It was too strong. It was virile. It accepted life in all its vivacity, ugliness and beauty, squalor and heroism. It was realism still. But it was realism carried to some higher pitch, in which facts were transformed by the more vivid light in which they were seen. He seemed to see things more profoundly through the grave eyes of those dead noblemen of Castile, and the gestures of the saints, which at first had seemed wild and distorted, appeared to have some mysterious significance. But he could not tell what that significance was. It was like a message which it was very important for him to receive, but it was given him in an unknown tongue, and he could not understand. He was always seeking for a meaning in life, and here it seemed to him that a meaning was offered. But it was obscure and vague. He was profoundly troubled. He saw what looked like the truth as by flashes of lightning on a dark stormy night you might see a mountain range. He seemed to see that a man need not leave his life to chance, but that his will was powerful. He seemed to see that self-control might be as passionate and as active as the surrender to passion. He seemed to see that the inward life might be as manifold, as varied, as rich with experience, as the life of one who conquered realms and explored unknown lands. End of chapter 88. Chapter 89. The conversation between Philip and Athelny was broken into by a clatter up the stairs. Athelny opened the door for the children coming back from Sunday school, and with laughter and shouting they came in. Gaily he asked them what they had learned. Sally appeared for a moment with instructions from her mother that father was to amuse the children while she got tea ready, and Athelny began to tell them one of Hans Andersen's stories. They were not shy children, and they quickly came to the conclusion that Philip was not formidable. Jane came and stood by him and presently settled herself on his knees. It was the first time that Philip in his lonely life had been present in a family circle. His eyes smiled as they rested on the fair children engrossed in the fairy tale. The life of his new friend, eccentric as it appeared at first glance, seemed now to have the beauty of perfect naturalness. Sally came in once more. "Now then, children, tea's ready," she said. Jane slipped off Philip's knees, and they all went back to the kitchen. Sally began to lay the cloth on the long Spanish table. "Mother says, shall she come and have tea with you?" she asked. "I can give the children their tea." "Tell your mother that we shall be proud and honoured if she will favour us with her company," said Athelny. It seemed to Philip that he could never say anything without an oratorical flourish. "Then I'll lay for her," said Sally. She came back again in a moment with a tray on which were a cottage loaf, a slab of butter, and a jar of strawberry jam. While she placed the things on the table her father chaffed her. He said it was quite time she was walking out. He told Philip that she was very proud and would have nothing to do with aspirants to that honour who lined up at the door 2 by 2 outside the Sunday school and craved the honour of escorting her home. "You do talk, father," said Sally with her slow, good-natured smile. "You wouldn't think to look at her that a tailor's assistant has enlisted in the army because she would not say how do you do to him, and an electrical engineer, mind you, has taken to drink because she refused to share her hymn book with him in church. I shudder to think what will happen when she puts her hair up." "Mother'll bring the tea along herself," said Sally. "Sally never pays any attention to me," laughed Athelny, looking at her with fond, proud eyes. "She goes about her business, indifferent to wars, revolutions, and cataclysms. What a wife she'll make to an honest man." Mrs. Athelny brought in the tea. She sat down and proceeded to cut bread and butter. It amused Philip to see that she treated her husband as though he were a child. She spread jam for him and cut up the bread and butter into convenient slices for him to eat. She had taken off her hat, and in her Sunday dress, which seemed a little tight for her, she looked like one of the farmers' wives whom Philip used to call on sometimes with his uncle when he was a small boy. Then he knew why the sound of her voice was familiar to him. She spoke just like the people round Blackstable. "What part of the country do you come from?" he asked her. "I'm a Kentish woman. I come from Ferne." "I thought as much. My uncle's vicar of Blackstable." "That's a funny thing now," she said. "I was wondering in church just now whether you was any connection of Mr. Carey. Many's the time I've seen him. A cousin of mine married Mr. Barker of Roxley Farm, over by Blackstable Church, and I used to go and stay there often when I was a girl. Isn't that a funny thing now?" She looked at him with a new interest, and a brightness came into her faded eyes. She asked him whether he knew Ferne. It was a pretty village, about 10 miles across country from Blackstable, and the vicar had come over sometimes to Blackstable for the harvest Thanksgiving. She mentioned names of various farmers in the neighbourhood. She was delighted to talk again of the country in which her youth was spent, and it was a pleasure to hear her recall scenes and people that had remained in her memory with the tenacity peculiar to her class. It gave Philip a queer sensation too. A breath of the countryside seemed to be wafted into that panelled room in the middle of London. He seemed to see the fat Kentish fields with their stately elms, and his nostrils dilated with the scent of the air. It is laden with the salt of the North Sea, and that makes it keen and sharp. Philip did not leave the Athelnys till 10 o'clock. The children came in to say good night at 8, and quite naturally put up their faces for Philip to kiss. His heart went out to them. Sally only held out her hand. "Sally never kisses gentlemen till she's seen them twice," said her father. "You must ask me again then," said Philip. "You mustn't take any notice of what father says," remarked Sally with a smile. "She's a most self-possessed young woman," added her parent. They had supper of bread and cheese and beer, while Mrs. Athelny was putting the children to bed; and when Philip went into the kitchen to bid her good night (she had been sitting there resting herself and reading the Weekly Dispatch) she invited him cordially to come again. "There's always a good dinner on Sundays so long as Athelny's in work," she said, "and it's a charity to come and talk to him." On the following Saturday Philip received a postcard from Athelny saying that they were expecting him to dinner next day; but fearing their means were not so much that Mr. Athelny would desire him to accept, Philip wrote back that he would only come to tea. He bought a large plum cake so that his entertainment should cost nothing. He found the whole family glad to see him, and the cake completed his conquest of the children. He insisted that they should all have tea together in the kitchen, and the meal was noisy and hilarious. Soon Philip got into the habit of going to Athelny's every Sunday. He became a great favourite with the children because he was simple and unaffected, and because it was so plain that he was fond of them. As soon as they heard his ring at the door, one of them popped a head out of window to make sure it was he, and then they all rushed downstairs tumultuously to let him in. They flung themselves into his arms. At tea they fought for the privilege of sitting next to him. Soon they began to call him Uncle Philip. Athelny was very communicative, and little by little Philip learned the various stages of his life. He had followed many occupations, and it occurred to Philip that he managed to make a mess of everything he attempted. He had been on a tea plantation in Ceylon, and a traveller in America for Italian wines. His secretaryship of the water company in Toledo had lasted longer than any of his employments. He had been a journalist and for some time had worked as police court reporter for an evening paper. He had been sub-editor of a paper in the Midlands and editor of another on the Riviera. From all his occupations he had gathered amusing anecdotes, which he told with a keen pleasure in his own powers of entertainment. He had read a great deal, chiefly delighting in books which were unusual, and he poured forth his stories of abstruse knowledge with childlike enjoyment of the amazement of his hearers. 3 or 4 years before, abject poverty had driven him to take the job of press representative to a large firm of drapers, and though he felt the work unworthy his abilities, which he rated highly, the firmness of his wife and the needs of his family had made him stick to it. End of chapter 89. Chapter 90. When he left the Athelnys, Philip walked down Chancery Lane and along the Strand to get a bus at the top of Parliament Street. One Sunday, when he had known them about 6 weeks, he did this as usual, but he found the Kennington bus full. It was June, but it had rained during the day, and the night was raw and cold. He walked up to Piccadilly Circus in order to get a seat. The bus waited at the fountain, and when it arrived there seldom had more than 2 or 3 people in it. This service ran every quarter of an hour, and he had some time to wait. He looked idly at the crowd. The public houses were closing, and there were many people about. His mind was busy with the ideas Athelny had the charming gift of suggesting. Suddenly his heart stood still. He saw Mildred. He had not thought of her for weeks. She was crossing over from the corner of Shaftesbury Avenue and stopped at the shelter till a string of cabs passed by. She was watching her opportunity and had no eyes for anything else. She wore a large black straw hat with a mass of feathers on it and a black silk dress. At that time it was fashionable for women to wear trains. The road was clear, and Mildred crossed, her skirt trailing on the ground, and walked down Piccadilly. Philip, his heart beating excitedly, followed her. He did not wish to speak to her, but he wondered where she was going at that hour. He wanted to get a look at her face. She walked slowly along and turned down Eyre Street, and so got through into Regent Street. She walked up again towards the Circus. Philip was puzzled. He could not make out what she was doing. Perhaps she was waiting for somebody, and he felt a great curiosity to know who it was. She overtook a short man in a bowler hat who was strolling very slowly in the same direction as herself. She gave him a sidelong glance as she passed. He walked a few steps more till she came to Swan and Edgar's, then stopped and waited, facing the road. When the man came up, she smiled. The man stared at her for a moment, turned away his head, and sauntered on. Then Philip understood. He was overwhelmed with horror. For a moment he felt such a weakness in his legs that he could hardly stand. Then he walked after her quickly. He touched her on the arm. "Mildred." She turned round with a violent start. He thought that she reddened, but in the obscurity he could not see very well. For a while they stood and looked at one another without speaking. At last she said, "Fancy seeing you." He did not know what to answer. He was horribly shaken, and the phrases that chased one another through his brain seemed incredibly melodramatic. "It's awful," he gasped, almost to himself. She did not say anything more. She turned away from him and looked down at the pavement. He felt that his face was distorted with misery. "Is there anywhere we can go and talk?" "I don't want to talk," she said sullenly. "Leave me alone, can't you?" The thought struck him that perhaps she was in urgent need of money and could not afford to go away at that hour. "I've got a couple of sovereigns on me if you're hard up," he blurted out. "I don't know what you mean. I was just walking along here on my way back to my lodgings. I expected to meet one of the girls from where I work." "For God's sake, don't lie now," he said. Then he saw that she was crying, and he repeated his questions. "Can't we go and talk somewhere? Can't I come back to your rooms?" "No, you can't do that," she sobbed. "I'm not allowed to take gentlemen in there. If you like, I'll meet you tomorrow." He felt certain that she would not keep an appointment. He was not going to let her go. "No, you must take me somewhere now." "Well, there is a room I know, but they'll charge 6 shillings for it." "I don't mind that. Where is it?" She gave him the address, and he called a cab. They drove to a shabby street beyond the British Museum, in the neighbourhood of Gray's Inn Road, and she stopped the cab at the corner. "They don't like you to drive up to the door," she said. They were the first words either of them had spoken since getting into the cab. They walked a few yards, and Mildred knocked 3 times sharply at a door. Philip noticed in the fanlight a cardboard on which was an announcement that apartments were to let. The door was opened quietly, and an elderly tall woman let them in. She gave Philip a stare and then spoke to Mildred in an undertone. Mildred led Philip along a passage to a room at the back. It was quite dark. She asked him for a match and lit the gas. There was no globe, and the gas flared shrilly. Philip saw that he was in a dingy little bedroom with a suite of furniture painted to look like pine much too large for it. The lace curtains were very dirty. The grate was hidden by a large paper fan. Mildred sank on the chair which stood by the side of the chimney-piece. Philip sat on the edge of the bed. He felt ashamed. He saw now that Mildred's cheeks were thick with rouge, her eyebrows were blackened, but she looked thin and ill, and the red on her cheeks exaggerated the greenish pallor of her skin. She stared at the paper fan in a listless fashion. Philip could not think what to say, and he had a choking in his throat as if he were going to cry. He covered his eyes with his hands. "My God, it is awful," he groaned. "I don't know what you've got to fuss about. I should have thought you'd have been rather pleased." Philip did not answer, and in a moment she broke into a sob. "You don't think I'd do it because I like it, do you?" "Oh, my dear," he cried, "I'm so sorry. I'm so awfully sorry." "That'll do me a fat lot of good." Again Philip found nothing to say. He was desperately afraid of saying anything which she might take for a reproach or a sneer. "Where's the baby?" he asked at last. "I've got her with me in London. I haven't got the money to keep her on at Brighton, so I had to take her. I've got a room up Highbury way. I told them I was on the stage. It's a long way to have to come down to the West End every day, but it's a rare job to find anyone who'll let to ladies at all." "Won't they take you back at the shop?" "I couldn't get any work to do anywhere. I walked my legs off looking for work. I did get a job once, but I was off for a week because I was queer, and when I went back they said they didn't want me any more. You can't blame them either, can you? Them places, they can't afford to have girls that aren't strong." "You don't look very well now," said Philip. "I wasn't fit to come out tonight, but I couldn't help myself. I wanted the money. I wrote to Emil and told him I was broke, but he never even answered the letter." "You might have written to me." "I didn't like to, not after what happened. And I didn't want you to know I was in difficulties. I shouldn't have been surprised if you'd just told me I'd only got what I deserved." "You don't know me very well, do you, even now?" For a moment he remembered all the anguish he had suffered on her account, and he was sick with the recollection of his pain. But it was no more than recollection. When he looked at her he knew that he no longer loved her. He was very sorry for her, but he was glad to be free. Watching her gravely, he asked himself why he had been so besotted with passion for her. "You're a gentleman in every sense of the word," she said. "You're the only one I've ever met." She paused for a moment and then flushed. "I hate asking you, Philip, but can you spare me anything?" "It's lucky I've got some money on me. I'm afraid I've only got £2." He gave her the sovereigns. "I'll pay you back, Philip." "Oh, that's all right," he smiled. "You needn't worry." He had said nothing that he wanted to say. They had talked as if the whole thing were natural. And it looked as though she would go now, back to the horror of her life, and he would be able to do nothing to prevent it. She had got up to take the money, and they were both standing. "Am I keeping you?" she asked. "I suppose you want to be getting home." "No, I'm in no hurry," he answered. "I'm glad to have a chance of sitting down." Those words, with all they implied, tore his heart, and it was dreadfully painful to see the weary way in which she sank back into the chair. The silence lasted so long that Philip, in his embarrassment, lit a cigarette. "It's very good of you not to have said anything disagreeable to me, Philip. I thought you might say I didn't know what all." He saw that she was crying again. He remembered how she had come to him when Emil Miller had deserted her, and how she had wept. The recollection of her suffering and of his own humiliation seemed to render more overwhelming the compassion he felt now. "If I could only get out of it," she moaned. "I hate it so. I'm unfit for the life. I'm not the sort of girl for that. I'll do anything to get away from it. I'd be a servant if I could. Oh, I wish I was dead." And in pity for herself she broke down now completely. She sobbed hysterically, and her thin body was shaken. "Oh, you don't know what it is. Nobody knows till they've done it." Philip could not bear to see her cry. He was tortured by the horror of her position. "Poor child," he whispered. "Poor child." He was deeply moved. Suddenly he had an inspiration. It filled him with a perfect ecstasy of happiness. "Look here, if you want to get away from it, I've got an idea. I'm frightfully hard up just now. I've got to be as economical as I can. But I've got a sort of little flat now in Kennington, and I've got a spare room. If you like, you and the baby can come and live there. I pay a woman 3 and 6pence a week to keep the place clean and to do a little cooking for me. You could do that, and your food wouldn't come to much more than the money I should save on her. It doesn't cost any more to feed 2 than 1, and I don't suppose the baby eats much." She stopped crying and looked at him. "Do you mean to say that you could take me back after all that's happened?" Philip flushed a little in embarrassment at what he had to say. I don't want you to mistake me. I'm just giving you a room which doesn't cost me anything and your food. I don't expect anything more from you than that you should do exactly the same as the woman I have in does. Except for that, I don't want anything from you at all. I dare say you can cook well enough for that." She sprang to her feet and was about to come towards him. "You are good to me, Philip." "No, please stop where you are," he said hurriedly, putting out his hand as though to push her away. He did not know why it was, but he could not bear the thought that she should touch him. "I don't want to be anything more than a friend to you." "You are good to me," she repeated. "You are good to me." "Does that mean you'll come?" "Oh, yes, I'll do anything to get away from this. You'll never regret what you've done, Philip. Never. When can I come, Philip?" "You'd better come tomorrow." Suddenly she burst into tears again. "What on earth are you crying for now?" he smiled. "I'm so grateful to you, I don't know how I can ever make it up to you." "Oh, that's all right. You better go home now." He wrote out the address and told her that if she came at 5:30 he would be ready for her. It was so late that he had to walk home, but it did not seem a long way, for he was intoxicated with delight. He seemed to walk on air. Chapter 91. Next day he got up early to make the room ready for Mildred. He told the woman who had looked after him that he would not want her any more. Mildred came about 6, and Philip, who was watching from the window, went down to let her in and help her to bring up the luggage. It consisted now of no more than 3 large parcels wrapped in brown paper, for she had been obliged to sell everything that was not absolutely needful. She wore the same black silk dress she had worn the night before, and though she had now no rouge on her cheeks, there was still about her eyes the black which remained after a perfunctory wash in the morning. It made her look very ill. She was a pathetic figure as she stepped out of the cab with the baby in her arms. She seemed a little shy, and they found nothing but commonplace things to say to one another. "So you got here all right." "I've never lived in this part of London before." Philip showed her the room. It was that in which Cronshaw had died. Philip, though he thought it absurd, had never liked the idea of going back to it, and since Cronshaw's death he had remained in the little room, sleeping on a fold-up bed into which he had first moved, in order to make his friend comfortable. The baby was sleeping placidly. "You don't recognise her, I expect," said Mildred. "I've not seen her since we took her down to Brighton." "Where shall I put her? She's so heavy I can't carry her very long." "I'm afraid I haven't got a cradle," said Philip with a nervous laugh. "Oh, she'll sleep with me. She always does." Mildred put the baby in an arm-chair and looked round the room. She recognised most of the things which she had known in his old diggings. Only one thing was new, a head and shoulders of Philip which Lawson had painted at the end of the preceding summer. It hung over the chimney-piece. Mildred looked at it critically. "In some ways I like it, and in some ways I don't. I think you're better looking than that." "Things are looking up," laughed Philip. "You've never told me I was good looking before." "I'm not one to worry myself about a man's looks. I don't like good looking men. They're too conceited for me." Her eyes travelled round the room in an instinctive search for a looking glass, but there was none. She put up her hand and patted her large fringe. "What'll the other people in the house say to my being here?" she asked suddenly. "Oh, there's only a man and his wife living here. He's out all day, and I never see her except on Saturday to pay my rent. They keep entirely to themselves. I've not spoken 2 words to either of them since I came." Mildred went into the bedroom to undo her things and put them away. Philip tried to read, but his spirits were too high. He leaned back in his chair, smoking a cigarette, and with smiling eyes looked at the sleeping child. He felt very happy. He was quite sure that he was not at all in love with Mildred. He was surprised that the old feeling had left him so completely. He discerned in himself a faint physical repulsion from her, and he thought that if he touched her it would give him goose flesh. He could not understand himself. Presently, knocking at the door, she came in again. "I say, you needn't knock," he said. "Have you made the tour of the mansion?" "It's the smallest kitchen I've ever seen." "You'll find it large enough to cook our sumptuous repasts," he retorted lightly. "I see there's nothing in. I'd better go out and get something." "Yes, but I venture to remind you that we must be devilish economical." "What shall I get for supper?" "You'd better get what you think you can cook," laughed Philip. He gave her some money and she went out. She came in half an hour later and put her purchases on the table. She was out of breath from climbing the stairs. "I say, you are anaemic," said Philip. "I'll have to dose you with Blaud's pills." "It took me some time to find the shops. I bought some liver. That's tasty, isn't it? And you can't eat much of it, so it's more economical than butcher's meat." There was a gas stove in the kitchen, and when she had put the liver on, Mildred came into the sitting room to lay the cloth. "Why are you only laying one place?" asked Philip. "Aren't you going to eat anything?" Mildred flushed. "I thought you mightn't like me to have my meals with you." "Why on earth not?" "Well, I'm only a servant, aren't I?" "Don't be an ass. How can you be so silly?" He smiled, but her humility gave him a curious twist in his heart. Poor thing. He remembered what she had been when first he knew her. He hesitated for an instant. "Don't think I'm conferring any benefit on you," he said. "It's simply a business arrangement. I'm giving you board and lodging in return for your work. You don't owe me anything. And there's nothing humiliating to you in it." She did not answer, but tears rolled heavily down her cheeks. Philip knew from his experience at the hospital that women of her class looked upon service as degrading. He could not help feeling a little impatient with her. But he blamed himself, for it was clear that she was tired and ill. He got up and helped her to lay another place at the table. The baby was awake now, and Mildred had prepared some Mellin's food for it. The liver and bacon were ready, and they sat down. For economy's sake, Philip had given up drinking anything but water, but he had in the house a half bottle of whiskey, and he thought a little would do Mildred good. He did his best to make the supper pass cheerfully, but Mildred was subdued and exhausted. When they had finished, she got up to put the baby to bed. "I think you'll do well to turn in early yourself," said Philip. "You look absolute done up." "I think I will after I've washed up." Philip lit his pipe and began to read. It was pleasant to hear somebody moving about in the next room. Sometimes his loneliness had oppressed him. Mildred came in to clear the table, and he heard the clatter of plates as she washed up. Philip smiled as he thought how characteristic it was of her that she should do all that in a black silk dress. But he had work to do, and he brought his book up to the table. He was reading Osler's Medicine, which had recently taken the place in the student's favour of Taylor's work, for many years the textbook most in use. Presently Mildred came in, rolling down her sleeves. Philip gave her a casual glance, but did not move. The occasion was curious, and he felt a little nervous. He feared that Mildred might imagine he was going to make a nuisance of himself, and he did not quite know how without brutality to reassure her. "By the way, I've got a lecture at 9, so I should want breakfast at 8:15. Can you manage that?" "Oh yes. Why, when I was in Parliament Street I used to catch the 8:12 from Herne Hill every morning." "I hope you'll find your room comfortable. You'll be a different woman tomorrow after a long night in bed." "I suppose you work till late?" "I generally work till about 11 or half past." "I'll say good night then." "Good night." The table was between them. He did not offer to shake hands with her. She shut the door quietly. He heard her moving about in the bedroom, and in a little while he heard the creaking of the bed as she got in. Chapter 91. Recording by Tom Weiss, Tom'sAudiobooks.com.